Hi. Like a lot of people at the moment stuck at home, I've been playing maybe more video games than usual, but I've really been enjoying Red Dead Redemption 2, and I have to say that the art direction of this game is outstanding. As a type nerd and designer, actually I've really been impressed by the typography in the game, and it's got me really fascinated with the typography of the time period. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the typography of one of the most iconic artifacts of the Wild West. Of course, the wanted poster or bounty poster, and I want to look how accurately it's been recreated in the game, as well as looking at a bit of the real-life history behind that. Red Dead Redemption 2 is set in 1899, right at the tail end of the 19th century. Now, of course, the 19th century was at the beginning was the Industrial Revolution, which of course made massive changes in technology. But a huge social change that also happened in that time was the adoption of mass literacy. So it meant that everyday people suddenly could read and write. Even our protagonist of this game, Arthur Morgan, a robber and gunslinger, has got immaculate penmanship, I have to say. When you read his personal journal in the game, I become quite envious of some of those flourished letters. But that is a side point. More importantly, what mass literacy meant was that print as an industry completely changed. Suddenly, when you had a literate majority, there was an explosion of demand for printed mass communication, including newspapers, flyers, broadsides, and posters, as well as all kinds of advertisements. So advertising really created an arms race for bigger and bolder type. And this spurned the innovation of mass-produced wood type. Not only was it cheaper to produce and lighter to transport than the older technology of metal type, but it was technically superior also for large letter forms. Before this innovation, most letterpress printing was done with hot metal type, and that's when hot molten lead would be put into a mold. Unfortunately, when you tried to make the letter forms larger, as the metal cooled down and contracted, it would distort and sometimes even crack. And by milling letters out of wood, they were able to create more uniform, mass-produced lettering. With this new technology, as well as a huge increase in demand for printed media, type design, which had been stagnant basically for centuries, suddenly saw a golden age of innovation and experimentation. With that foundation in mind, let's take a closer look at some of the typography used in the wanted posters inside Red Dead 2. So here we have the first bounty poster from the game, and it is a very prototypical example of the genre. It has got this fantastic big wanted stamped on the top, obviously. Now this is in a slab serif, or what was then called an Egyptian or antique style font. Now Egyptian is a bit of a misnomer in that the 19th century was obsessed with Egyptology. It was just really a clever marketing trick to call it Egyptian, even though it has no relation to Egypt. But the slab serif's innovation was to take up more visual space than a traditional serif. So if you think about a font like Times New Roman, which is an example of another serif font, it would take up less space, more like this. And so by squaring off the serifs, it took up more visual space and drew the eye in a different way. This is just one example, very kind of typical of the font that you think of when you say wanted poster or the Wild West. Now, beneath that, we have this For Capture Alive set in a sans serif font. Now, when it was invented in the 18-teens by William Caslen, was the first sans serif font, people were scandalized by this, and a lot of these early sans serifs were based off sign writing, architectural forms, this kind of thing. But one very period accurate feature of this is actually that there are no lowercase letters. A lot of the early sans serif grotesques, or gothics as they were known, didn't feature lowercase. They only had uppercase letters. And that's because they were mostly used for advertising headlines. Also, we have these nice indexes here. These pointing fingers were a typographic tool that was in the arsenal of the printers of the day, and they did use them to highlight key information in things like this. One small detail I really like is that this poster overall would have been printed on a letterpress machine to get the wood type onto the paper. But then the problem with letterpress is that it does not produce very good half tones like shades of grey and that. And so you can see that they've tried to recreate the look of pasting a photograph inside a square area, which was quite true of how real life wanted posters worked. So they would kind of have the text printed in one process and then actually stick on the photographs because the printing technology wasn't able to reproduce those colors. So I think, yeah, very good overall. So here we have another reward poster, this one for Elly Swann, and it has got that same distinctive slab serif font, that antique font used for reward, and it has, what I love is this fat face typeface they've chosen for the numerals, $25. Now the fat face was an evolution of the Didone or modernist style serif font. If you think about the cover of Vogue magazine, the masthead, or the logo of Calvin Klein, these are both Didone typefaces, and the fat face was really an evolution of that to kind of really up the contrast between very thin hairline details and very thick exaggerated forms on the side. So a very strong stress on the vertical part and very thin hairline horizontal parts in these type designs. And you can still see a fat face design used on the United States dollar. Of course, the ones on the dollar were actually drawn not from type specimens, but here at the bottom we have again the sans serif font used only in all caps, which is nice to see. Period accurate recreation there. And I have to say, I really like that I found this example of a real reward poster that has almost the exact same layout. The numerals at the top and then spelled out in words and reward. This is almost an exact recreation here of this layout, at least for the headline portion, and I think that's just kind of neat. Thirdly and lastly, we have this poster for the reward for Lindsay Wafaa, $100. And this has got a nice mix of different typography. So we have obviously proclamation here again in that fat face font, nice and bold. And this is again a kind of Didone related font beneath there. Then we have got the grotesque again with a mix of caps and small caps because again, no lowercase. And then the word reward has got a very interesting typeface and not completely anachronistic. It looks quite similar to a wood type font called Grecian. At least the Hamilton cut version was called Grecian, with this kind of octagonal angular cuts, although it has got that interesting contrast between the thin serifs and very thick line weight overall, but not inaccurate for the period, just a bit more obscure than some of the other ones. Overall, just a very good job on this poster. So let's finish up by taking a bit of a closer look at some real life late 19th century wanted posters and compare. So here we have one from Wisconsin, USA for the forger Alexander Cohen. This is a great example of the Clarendon style font. It has that nice chamfered round edge on the E, but this is a variant called French Clarendon, which has put an emphasis on the top and bottom serif. So it has this very strange kind of weight where the thickest parts are actually all at the top and bottom, and the kind of middle section is very thin by comparison. Something we don't really see much anymore these days, but an interesting variation nonetheless. It also has got two different sized indexes used on the layout, which is a little quirky. And lastly, we have this example here from New York from 1872, it looks like. The typeface for this $1,000 reward, a very interesting one. It is a slab serif. You can see the serifs off the L there. It also has a very octagonal kind of diagonal cut design, but the proportions do look familiar to me. It does remind me of the proportions of the typeface used for that classic American Letterman jacket. So I would suspect that the type used on those was probably descended from one of these wood typefaces, not dissimilar from this one. And one final little detail is this guy, Albert Kleist, his name is spelled in extruded decorative letters, which is not uncommon at the time to have different cuts of decorative embellished versions of alphabets available, but most of them were used for advertising. But $1,000 was an extremely high bounty, so I suppose that in this case the city of New York spared no expense in advertising for this man's arrest. So there we go. I think overall that Rockstar Games have done an excellent job of recreating 19th century typography and wood type in Red Dead 2. And of course, this is only just scratching the surface of the lettering and typography in the game world that they've made. If you would like to see further videos about this, do let me know in the comments. If you are interested in learning some of the history for yourself, I can highly recommend a few resources, including the Hamilton Wood Type and Printing Museum, as well as the Rob Roy Kelly collection of specimens, and the fantastic scholarly work of Professor David Shields, all of which I will link down in the video description. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Linus, and I will be back with more type nerdery in a future video.